Good morning. It's wonderful to see you this morning. I thought maybe you gave that to Amanda for a moment. She was going to hurry me along. I hope that you, those of you whose mother is still with us on earth in mortal form, I hope that you have given her honor this morning. And for those of you whom maybe this day is not as bright and joyous as you would desire, that you would give your mother honor as well in your heart and in your life, and to those whom you love. Mothers are special, aren't they? Mothers are wonderful. And when I think of motherly examples, and I spent some time searching for where to go, because this is a broad topic, right? If I was to plan on getting up here and talking about all mothers do, well, it would be longer than normal, Emily. And I think Russ's comic in the back of the bulletin illustrate that well. Yes, you have one day of vacation a year, and yes, you're expected to work on Mother's Day too. And to illustrate that, yesterday, Brittany called me yesterday and said, "What are we doing for Mother's Day?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "Why don't you call and see if you can get us in somewhere?" She said, "I'm a mother." So I was on the road, so I made some calls, but I was, Sean, I hope you didn't procrastinate as long as I did. It was Saturday afternoon, so I was having some difficulty, and so Brittany ended up on the phone a lot to try and to arrange that. She was actually on a conference call with me, and I called what used to be Holiday Inn in Clarion, and I said to him, "Are you having Mother's Day lunch tomorrow?" He said, "No, we're sorry, we're not doing that this year." I said, "Oh, my mother's going to be so disappointed. Are you sure you can't do something for me?" The poor lady was a little uncomfortable with talking to me. So she apologized and we went on. So even mothers are expected. One of the suggestions Chris had yesterday was, "Well, Brittany, why don't you just have lunch and we can have it at our house?" Mother's work is endless, isn't it? Tireless. And fathers and sons and daughters, there are things that we ought to, we joke about that as I have, but one of the ways I think we could honor our mothers is by stepping up to the plate, right? By helping out a little bit, by relieving some of that burden. Motherhood, as we will see today in Luke, the 2nd chapter, and I see I have chapter 1 on here, but really I believe it is chapter 1. I'll get with this in a moment. Motherhood is joyous, as you mothers know, but it also comes with a burden. It comes with a lot of burden. When we think about a mother called by God, what better example could there be than Mary? And there are some beautiful examples we'll look at as we look at her example today. Be grateful for your mother. Be grateful for what she's provided for you, both in life and otherwise in life and in supporting life. In that bottom left-hand corner, does anyone know what that little cute, fuzzy, furry animal is? Oh, yeah, do you know what kind of seal? Harp seal? Is that what you said? Yeah, it's a harp seal. Oh man, harp seals are so fortunate for the first 12 days of their life. Because for the first 12 days of their life, their mother works tirelessly, does not even eat herself. You know the feeling, don't you, Amanda? Does not even eat herself because she's providing for her pup. Did you catch for how long I said that was? 12 days, that's right. Because on day number 13, Mama harp seal swims away, never to return. And if you search for harp seal pups, you'll find all kinds of examples like this where they're floating on ice. The reason is, at day 13, they are not capable of swimming. They are not capable of hunting and feeding themselves. And yet Mom's gone. Over the next, I believe, month, or maybe it was 2 months, that little harp seal will lose 80% of its weight until it's mature enough to finally dive into that water and go hunt on its own. 12 days. 12 days. Giraffes have really long what, Anna? Really long, or Ella, I meant to say, good job. Really long necks, don't they? But can anyone else, and maybe you need to look at this picture to tell, what else do they have that's really long? Hannah? Legs, yes. Really long legs. You know why that's relevant? Because they don't lay down to give birth. I didn't burden you with pictures of a giraffe giving birth. But babies are born what first? Head first. 14 feet, plummet to the ground. Jerry, if that's how you and I were born, someone say, well, that explains a lot about Mike, huh? Right? 14 feet, she or he falls to the ground. Wow. Makes you thankful for your mother, doesn't it? I love this picture of the black bear. And, it says a lot about motherhood, I think. But one of the things that is interesting about black bears is they're known to be great mothers as a rule. And they will have 2, 3, sometimes even 4 cubs at a time. But does anyone know what they'll do if they only have 1 cub? So they figure one's not worth their time. No, just abandon them. Is that what you were going to say, David? Yep. What I read say abandon them. And just let them starve. One's not worth their time. Boy, Christian, for the first 3 years of your life, you'd have been in trouble. All right? I use some of these examples because, as we're going to point out in our lesson, mothers aren't perfect. Mothers don't have to be perfect. But boy, the blessings we get from mothers. Kevin read this passage for us today, but the first thing I'd like to point out is a mother called by God submits to God's will. We need godly mothers. We were talking about this in our Bible study this morning, about the fact that we can lament where our culture and where our society and where the world is going. But it is the family structure that has the ability to impact that. And strong families will impact the church, and strong churches are meant and designed by God to impact culture. See, we as Christians, we're not empowered to whine. We as Christians were empowered to influence and impact the world. Mothers, you play an irreplaceable role in doing that. This is Mary. Can you imagine at the young, tender age that Mary was, with all the plans and all the goals and all the anticipations coming in life. Mom, some of you may be able to relate at varying levels to this. God comes to Mary and says, you're going to be a mother. Verse 34, Mary said to the angel, how will this be since I am a virgin? And the angel answered her, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the child to be born will be called Holy, the Son of God. And behold, your relative Elizabeth, in her age, has also conceived a son. And this is the 6th month with her who was called barren. And mothers, I think this is important. Verse 37 is an important phrase for all of us, but especially you mothers to remember, because that's who Gabriel is speaking to, is Mary, when he says, for nothing will be impossible with God. For nothing will be impossible with God. Notice what Mary says. And Mary said, behold, I am the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word. And the angel departed from her. You think Mary was nervous? You think Mary was concerned? Do you think Mary would have been maybe a little more content with the plan she had? I mean, sometimes we get focused on the problems this causes with Joseph, and that would have been significant, right? Was significant. For Mary to submit to God, she had to accept the conflict in her relationship, the conflict with Joseph. She had to try and convince Joseph of the unbelievable, of the impossible. Mary was scared. Now, I know what you may, if you're a very studious individual and Christian, you may be saying, yeah, but the angel comes to Joseph and helps her, help convince him, doesn't he? But what of her family? What of her friends? What of the townspeople? Submitting to God by Mary, it's not easy. Submitting to God as a mother is a tall task, a serious endeavor. But oftentimes, if I go back here, a couple of pictures, that's one of the many, many nativity scenes that you could look up, and we think of all the joyous and all the joy and good things around the nativity scene, right? But that's not what it was all about. Number one, the fact that they are in poverty, that they are in a horrible position when Jesus is born, illustrates one of the struggles they had. But what about the fact that the prophecy is not all good? The prophecy of Jesus is, Mary, a sword is going to be thrust through you. Mary surely had fear that went along with this submission to God. With motherhood, there's a great deal of pain that comes. There's a great deal of worry. There's a great deal of concern and hurt. The mother called by God submits completely to God's will. We need mothers who are committed to God. I sometimes wonder what the church would look like if we as families strove to be as committed to the church as we are to our sports teams. In no way do I mean to criticize anyone, and I do recognize in our culture today that you just don't criticize. You don't mention this kind of stuff. But if suggesting that our Christian duty could rise to the level of at least being equal to our commitment to our sporting events is too much. Then I'm afraid there's not much I could say. We enjoy our children being in sports, and that's how I know to use this as an illustration, because it teaches at least three great things, doesn't it? Commitment, teamwork, and priorities. I can't tell you how many times Evie says, "Dad, can I go with Uncle Chris tomorrow?" Amanda looks at the schedule and says, "Evie, you have soccer." Right? She learns commitment. She learns teamwork. And she learns priorities. What, though, if we teach that a little too well? What if we teach that the commitment to any earthly team is greater than that to God? If the teamwork of the church takes second fiddle to the teamwork of our teams, and if the priority is the church falls behind anything else. The point is that we as families, I believe, must be committed. We must understand that there are things in this world that are more important than life and death themselves. And I believe Mary's life and Mary's commitment, as we looked at it, those examples illustrate that. And I pray that we will be committed, mothers, but not just mothers, families, for the cause of God, cause of Christ. A mother's not just completely submissive to God, but a mother called by God does not have to be perfect. I alluded to this before, but I'm not sure that we could overemphasize this, because this is the common thread in so many conversations that I have with mothers today. I can't tell you over the years how many times I've preached on the Lord's Supper, and inevitably, almost, and now I'm in the habit of actually mentioning it when I speak about the Lord's Supper, a mother comes to me, or two mothers, and says, "Mike, I'm afraid I haven't properly taken the Lord's Supper in about 3 years." Why is she saying that? Brittany, why would a mother ever say that? She's got little ones hanging and crawling and all over. Caden, do you think you ever were a distraction for your mother during the Lord's Supper? I'll bet you were. Yeah, which he doesn't dispute for those that didn't look at Caden. But Caden, you weren't the only one. Or was he, Tracy? No, he wasn't the only one. And so mothers, so oftentimes, I think understanding the importance of their role, become discouraged by their shortcomings. You know, I used sports as an example a few moments ago, but you know what's really interesting to me is when you go to sporting events, and it's been quite a while since I've been to any because of COVID, but it's always interesting to sit in the pew and you have these men, we'll take baseball for example, who are buff, right? If I don't recall incorrectly, which I may, Chris, was Brittany not fond on sitting at first baseline when Pedro Alvarez was playing? Right? They are physical specimens, right? Who train their entire life for this. And yet, Lee, what do we hear when we sit in a stand? Everything. Why would you do that? How could you not hit that ball? Right? Now, I picked on Lee, but Lee's barely athletic, right? And I mean, I walk up those steps, and I huff and puff before I sit down. Then I'm going to criticize the center fielder for not tracking that fly ball, right? How could you not catch that? You see my point? It's easy when you're not engaged to criticize. Who are the parents that know everything? The ones who don't have kids, right? Heather, remember how easy parenting was before you had kids? I mean, you see those little rotten kids at the restaurant, and why wouldn't their parents just A, B, or C? My point is, mothers, please understand that one of the reasons that oftentimes you are so aware of your failures is because you are participating. You are engaged, and you are doing. It was said by an individual I've been told many times who once preached here that I like the way I'm doing things better than the way you're not. And mothers, I think you could say those words. There's always room for improvement. But don't be discouraged by your shortcomings. Notice this great woman, this great individual in John the 2nd chapter comes to Jesus, Mary. And on the third day, they were sitting at a wedding at Canaan in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. And when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Now, for much of my life, I kind of pictured this as Mary coming up to Jesus quietly and saying, "They're out of wine." I don't think that's how that happened. And the context here would imply otherwise. I believe more of what happened, if I'm not mistaken, we have to interpret or read some into this to know exactly, but I think more of what's happening is Mary says in a public display, "Hey, they're out of wine. You need to do something." I say that because Jesus rebukes her. If it was quietly, it would have been a quiet conversation, but he says, "Woman, what..." Does that sound familiar, Emily? "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour's not yet come." Some would go as far to think that Jesus was disrespectful to his mother, but I do not believe so at all. But he is certainly rebuking her. What does this have to do with me? My hour's not yet come. Mary wasn't perfect. Jesus is illustrating that she is out of place here. But let's note this about mothers. What does Jesus do? exactly as his mother asked him. Exactly as his mother asked him. In fact, I love her response. She turns to the servants and says, do whatever he tells you to do. Mary knew her son. Mary wasn't perfect. In Matthew, the 12th chapter, verses 46 and 50 is maybe a much more obvious example of this, though. Jesus is preaching, and elsewhere we see that he hadn't been eating, and there were some that were concerned he was overdoing it. And we know his brothers are involved here in Matthew, the 12th chapter, and his brothers have been his critics for quite some time. And in chapter 12, we see Mary with the brothers coming, and they can't even get to Jesus because of the crowd, and he's teaching the crowd. And so someone tells Jesus, Jesus, your mother and your brothers are here. What were they there for? To straighten Jesus out. Have you ever, Barb, did you ever have this conversation with one of your children? You need to eat. You need to sit down, take time for yourself, rest and eat. You ever have to have that conversation? I thought you may have, right? But Jesus was about God's work, and Mary's going to set him straight. You ever put yourself in Mary's position when Jesus says, who's my mother and who's my brothers? And points to those who'd surround him. What a strong public rebuke. I believe Mary made a mistake because she was a person. She was a human mother. I've got to the point where I almost avoid using Proverbs, the 31st chapter, as a Mother's Day lesson. Because inevitably, you read that and mothers say, what? I can't do that. And there's some things that we miss when we look at Proverbs, the 31st chapter, starting in verse 10, of course. Because one of the things we miss is this is an ideal, right? And by the way, the ideal does not look like anything we oftentimes have said the ideal mother looks like. There's in the church been a lot of things taught that Proverbs 31st woman that's not her. This woman never stops. You say, oh, I can relate to that part. Right? Moms, I can relate to that part. It's an ideal. It's a representation of mothers, in part to illustrate how great they are. See, Hannah, when you woke up this morning, you said to Mom, happy Mother's Day. You are the best, right? We understand that we use language to glorify, right? We're not putting others' mothers down when we say that. We're saying, Mom, you're the best. We mean it because she's something special to us. The point being, the 31st proverb is not literal. It's a perfect woman. What we also miss is that in the Hebrew, there's 22 lines in the 31st proverb, and each one starts with a letter of the alphabet. In English, I read earlier today that it may go something like this. A is for the apple pie she bakes. B is for all the baths she gives. C is for all the clothes she cleans. And on through right till you get to Z, when Z is for the zoo she maintains in her yard. Right? No wonder it starts out saying a virtuous woman, who can find her? But for the record, I did. By the way, gentlemen, I meant to start with this phrase. Compliment your wife today, even if at first it scares her. Right? How many of you know who this is? The one on the left, at least. That's an aged pictures. If you had, that's Ben Carson. Right? It's the story of Ben Carson's mother when he was in elementary school. Anna, you can relate to this to some degree in different ways. Dr. Ben Carson had a mother who was very serious about school. And his mother made him work very hard. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, I thought it might. And one of the things that his mother made him do, and his brother, was to do 2 book reports a week. Not to be handed in to school, but to be handed in to their mother. 2 book reports a week. That sounds even rougher than your teacher, doesn't it, Anna? Yeah, she had to think about that. It wasn't until he was in junior high they said he ever realized that his mother was illiterate. She couldn't read a word he was writing. You see, a mother called by God does not have to be perfect. Mothers, we honor you, and even your flaws are what make you what you are. A mother called by God never relinquishes the title. There was a prophecy early, before Mary ever has Jesus. And Mary's told there's going to be terrible suffering in your motherhood. And I believe that Mary probably thought that was the case when her son was essentially homeless, walking the dirt paths of Galilee, being rejected. Mary would have been there at Nazareth. As Jesus said, a prophet is not without honor except for in his home. As they strove to cast him off the cliff, Mary surely thought this is what that prophecy was talking about. But nay, John 19 and 25, as we read the account of the crucifixion, verse 25 says, "But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene." Mary stood at the base of the cross as Jesus gave his life for you and me. I think we all recognize in parenthood that there does come a time when much of our role is defined by pain. Mary was there. Now, sometimes we make the assumptions that everyone comes from the same background and the same experiences as we come from. And so we think that everyone's lives should look like ours. I'm mindful of the mothers who have so much hurt, and maybe in some cases, very early on, understand that the best way they can be a mother is to give their child up for adoption. Even in that sacrificial decision, mothers making incredibly difficult decisions oftentimes for the benefit and well-being of the child. Both spiritually and physically, it's not uncommon when you talk to individuals who have been successful and you ask them how it is that they've been successful. You'll oftentimes hear, my mom never gave up on me. Never gave up on me. Mother called by God never relinquishes the title, even when the role and situation changes. Once again, I thank you, mothers. As we think about Mary, Mary saw the whole plan of God laid out, didn't she? She was there before anyone else knew and heard those surprising words, Mary, you're going to be with child. And she says, how? And then surely she thought, why? She was there, and where scriptures are silent throughout all those years except one event. Just that one event when he was age 12 that we see Scripture speak of. But Mary was there for that. And she was there for the rest of it. She was there when he started his ministry. She was there for so many of the miracles. She was there for the crucifixion. She was there for the resurrection. If you look at Acts, the 2nd chapter, she's even one of the ones there on the day of Pentecost, when the Spirit falls upon the disciples, the apostles, and the church has its birth. Mary saw it all. Mary was there from start to finish. Mothers, I would suggest to you that we don't always have the privilege of seeing the start. We very seldom have the privilege of seeing the finish. But God has a plan, God has a role, God has a purpose for you. And you are of great import in more lives than you likely remember or know. There was a comic of which a couple of young lads were sitting around debating this question, and don't worry, I'm not going to make you uncomfortable. Where do babies come from? And so one little lad says, the stork brings them. Second lad says, no, the UPS man brings them. Or do they come in an Amazon box? But then the final last lad speaks up and says, no, I know for sure that they are connected to their mothers by a biblical cord. Thank you, mothers, for what you've done in the past. Thank you for what you'll do in the future. Keep the faith. Fight the good fight. You are important. This morning, if Jesus Christ is not your Lord and Savior, I encourage you to make the decision to take the actions to make sure your life is fully and wholly committed to Him. If at this time we can help you in your endeavor to do that, I encourage you to make it known as together we stand and sing.